And I don't like to use the word stunning very often, but stunning is the word that I would use to describe the Penguins' inability to close out a 3-1 lead at the midpoint of Wednesday night's Game 3 in Toronto. 4-3 losers were the Penguins to drop behind the Canadiens 2-1 in this best-of-5 series. Yes, they're officially on the brink. Didn't see this one coming for sure. That was about as surprising of a collapse as I've seen from the Penguins in a while. It just really felt like they were taking command of that game, and they did have command of that game, not just with a couple of power play goals, but also with the Teddy Bluger goal early in the second period. And as it turns out, it doesn't matter because the Penguins can't close it out. They let their foot off the gas late in the second period. And then in the third, an early penalty to Zach Aston Reese gives the Canadiens some momentum. And Jeff Petrie rings a shot off the mask of Matt Murray and into the net from an extreme angle. There was no angle, not much of one, at least. So Petrie's second goal of the series, his second game-winning goal of the series. And the Penguins are behind again against the 12-seeded Montreal Canadiens. I'm Matt Gajtka. This is Pittsburgh Postgame, as I indicated at the top on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Dan Kingerski will be joining me from Toronto shortly, but for right now, we're talking about one of the more disappointing results in recent history for the Penguins. Yeah, I know they got swept last year in the playoffs. Yeah, I know they lost in 6 games to the Capitals in overtime back in 2018, but this one just stings more for me. I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling this one and feeling like at the moment that it's going to be really difficult for this team to rebound from what we just saw and somehow find a way to get after it in Game 4 and be ready to go. Because, well, tonight we saw them not quite ready to go as well in the game, but they still rebounded to take a lead, to take a commanding lead, in fact, in the game. I'll call 2 goals at the midway point a commanding lead for sure. But now the emotional reverberations of this one, especially since your goalie let in a really leaky one there in the third. And did you not see it like I did? I saw a lot of shoulders sink. I didn't see a lot of spunk from the Penguins in that third until they got that late power play. And, well, the juices really kicked in there to try to tie the game. But there was a serious letdown, not just in your living room, I'm sure, but also on the Penguins bench when that puck went in. Thank you to our first couple of commenters on the chat tonight. Please let us know your pluses and minuses for the evening, as we do on every Pens edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here. I'm guessing there'll be more of the latter, more of the minuses than there are of the pluses, but certainly some positives, especially from the power play. Special teams actually was really good for the Penguins, and it still didn't matter. They outscored Montreal 2-0 on special teams. They got more penalty kills. The Habs still haven't scored a power play goal in 3 games this series. But I see now people chiming in already. Derek Stewart saying stunned. How about dopey? That's what Milbury called it. I'm sorry, I wasn't watching on the national feed on NBC Sports. For as good as John Forsland is, I'm assuming he was on the play-by-play. I can't tolerate Mike Milbury. Had the AT&T Sportsnet broadcast on, and well, if you didn't have the local broadcast on, you should have heard the mental gymnastics that, or the verbal gymnastics and mental gymnastics that Bob Airey was going through to not criticize that goal. But it was one of the softest goals we have seen in recent Penguins playoff history. Right up there with any of those disaster goals Marc-Andre Fleury allowed in that Islanders series 7 years ago, or the Montreal Canadiens series from 10 years ago now. And not that Carey Price stole this game at all, but we're starting to get that similar feel to where the Penguins just can't keep it together for long enough to keep this Montreal team down. A Montreal team that, just like in 2010, should not have beaten the Penguins, should not beat the Penguins this time around, even if it is best of 5 and it's more random than best of 7. Manu Martin says, how can they be so bad? I'm concerned about, they weren't bad tonight throughout, but I'm concerned about the start and I'm concerned about the finish. And even though they had a 3-1 lead, there were still reasons to be concerned about this team's overall play. The Malkin line, pretty much non-existent. The Crosby line was great. Sid and Gensel and Sherry continue to generate chances and shots and help the Penguins keep the puck down in the Montreal end, even when they aren't scoring. But not a lot from Malkin's line. Really nothing from the Sam Lafferty line. Lafferty, the Hollidaysburg native out near Altoona, is where he hails from. Made history before the game. Just the second Penguins player from Western Pennsylvania to start a playoff game, to play a playoff game for this team behind Ryan Malone. And he had a couple big hits early, but also on the ice for that early goal for Montreal when the Penguins were running around. So that short short shift that Lafferty was trying to get was not short enough in that spot. And the small lineup change that Mike Sullivan made, sending Jared McCann out for undisclosed reasons, we'll never know, or we won't know for a while on that one, I guess. But McCann had been pretty poor in the first 2 games, so Lafferty draws in, but that third line, I'll call it the fourth line now with Hornqvist and Marleau, it's not getting any ice time. The real third line is Teddy Bluger between Brandon Tanev and Zach Aston Reese. They were, once again, pretty sharp tonight, I would say, but even with the goal from your quote-unquote fourth line, the Penguins still can't hold on. But you know what the story is in goal? Matt Murray, and the story is Jack Johnson and Justin Schultz. And I'm going to let Schultz off the hook, even though I've been a vocal critic of Jack Johnson's presence on this team forever and ever and ever. Ever since they were rumored and reported to be signing him 2 summers ago, I was wondering, what in the world is Jim Rutherford thinking? Jack Johnson, again, out there for a couple of goals against. That third goal especially, he ends up swimming in the crease and basically showing his utter lack of recovery ability and utter lack of skating ability. Ty Maddog says, huge Habs fan back. Man, blew the lead, all momentum shift. Who knows? 2 more games. Well, the Habs are going to have 2 chances to eliminate the Penguins starting on Friday at Scotiabank Arena. Not at 8. That takes those of us in the Eastern time zone off the hook in terms of the late nights. 4 o'clock start. Maybe that'll help the Penguins get going a little bit quicker than they did tonight, because the Habs were all over them, rebounding from that loss in Game 2, and they got an early goal. But the Penguins' power play did wake up, and they had 14 shots on goal last game. Let's be clear. This was not some situation where they were completely impotent in Game 2. But tonight, they got the results that they were looking for. They got a great pass from Evgeny Malkin. I mentioned at even strength, not a lot from him, but that pass on the power play to set up Hornqvist at the side of the net right after he'd just been blasted from behind to draw another penalty. That was a satisfying score from the Pens. And then Brian Rust tees it up for Jason Zucker less than a minute later on the ensuing power play after the delayed call. So back-to-back, usually that's a pretty close to a death blow, especially in a playoff game, but not to be tonight. So if you're looking at some of the advanced metrics tonight, as I mentioned, that third line, make it the fourth line, Marleau, Lafferty, and Hornqvist, they were right around 25% in terms of shots for and shots against. It's just ugly stuff there. Speaking of ugly, Jack Johnson scoring chances for and against. You're not going to like these numbers here. First of all, shots on goal for and against with Jack Johnson on the ice. 3 for the Penguins on, 11 against. Scoring chances, 9 against when Jack Johnson's on the ice to just 5 for the Penguins on the plus side. And that was actually much worse about midway through. So I think score effects helped the Penguins a little bit late in the third. But overall, I just wasn't even impressed with the pushback in the third after they gave up the lead for the second time in the game. Manu Martin says J.J. Schultz out of the lineup, maybe. Yankel Rosenblum chimes in. He says, is Jarry playing next game? Well, for me, if you're not going to start Tristan Jarry, or if you are going to start Tristan Jarry in this series, it seems like they're not going to. If you are going to start him, then Game 4 has to be it, right? And I feel like there's got to be some accountability here. Jarry had the better regular season. I said before the series that, okay, I could see it being a toss-up considering the 3- and 4-year sample size. But for me, Jarry is on the rise as an NHL goalie, and Matt Murray has not been on the rise for a while. And even though he played a pretty good game too, I would say that's probably 2 out of 3 games where he was pretty easily outplayed by Carey Price. And I think Carey even played pretty well tonight despite giving up the 3 goals. So, again, the goaltending matchup doesn't go the Penguins' way. I didn't expect it to in this series. Perhaps I thought Murray could get a little bit hot, and there were signs of that last game. But it's really tough for a goaltender, right? Because in the end, he could have played the perfect game until that goal given up, and you let in a bad goal like that at a big-time, third period, pivotal playoff game. It's pretty much unforgivable for me. So especially when you have an option. We've seen other teams in this playoff already go to their other options. UC Soros in Nashville helped them win Game 2. And then you also saw in Edmonton, Mike Smith was benched. Now, Mike Smith doesn't have the track record that Matt Murray does, but in these short series, you got to pull the trigger. And, well, it's now or never for Mike Sullivan, I would say. Jeremy C2 asks, is Gensel 100%? I think it looks pretty close to 100%. What else would you be looking for from Jake Gensel? Because he's creating chances every time out. Nearly had another couple of goals tonight. Is Marleau better than McCann? Jeremy asks as well. I'm not sure about that. I think they're both pretty much non-entities in this series. Caleb Tresky says, this loss stinks. I can't believe we blew that 3-1 lead. Yeah, that is what really stinks here, because the Penguins had a chance. It appeared to me like they were ready to run away with the series at 3-1, right? You get that goal from the grind line, that bottom six goal that can tend to be a big deal. All these potential harbingers of success just didn't pan out today. There just wasn't that follow-up from the Penguins. There wasn't that resilience. And I think we often hear about resilience when it comes to dealing with adversity. We hear that a lot in that case. But for me, there's also the resilience after you score, after you do a good thing. How do you respond to that? And I thought late in the first period, the Penguins responded well. They were playing with confidence, snapping that puck around. It looked like the ice was a lot better. If it wasn't, it was just them being sharper and trying some things, being creative. You want them to play to their limits. You don't want to take the stick out of their hands, as Mike Sullivan likes to say very often. And I think for the most part, he hasn't over his coaching tenure. And, we saw a lot of good things from the Penguins attack in this one, even though it was just the one goal at even strength, and it was from the Teddy Bluger line. So anyway, give me your pluses, give me your minuses. I'm seeing a lot more minuses out there. Going to go to Twitter here. Herb66 says they look old. Good first half of games, then they fade as the game goes on. Hey, you might have a point there, Herb. Remember, so many of these star players on the Penguins, so many of these pivotal players are in their 30s. I'm 35. I know maybe I don't feel quite as good as I did at 25, but it's proven, all joking aside, it's proven that a hockey player's prime is in his 20s. It's not a sport like baseball where you can stretch it out in your 30s pretty much. I think Sidney Crosby's done a pretty darn good job at doing that. Same with Evgeny Malkin with his bounce-back season. But you're right. There just wasn't a lot of spring in those legs in the third period. Tim Thorson chimes in with a plus. A 1 in 8 chance for, how do we spell it? I don't know what that means. Anyway, minus me thinking this was a championship level team. Hey, I thought they had a good chance to go deep in the playoffs, and they still have a good chance to go deep in the playoffs. They got to win 2 in a row here, but if they make it through, based upon what we've seen in the round robin, I'm not sure the Boston Bruins, the Penguins' potential matchup in the next round, would be firing on maybe even most of their cylinders. Definitely not all of them, as they haven't looked so good. Bigger minus from Tim Thorson says, the one person on planet Earth who didn't think the Johnson deal was a disaster in waiting from the second it was first discussed. Yeah, we still see Johnson defenders. I know our own Dan Kingerski has defended Jack Johnson many times, but I just don't see it. For me, he's one of the worst players in the league, and especially on the Penguins, he sticks out like a sore thumb, a team that tries to win through skill and speed. And, it's such a mixed bag with Jim Rutherford last couple of off seasons, because the Brandon Tanev selection, the signing in free agency, I thought too long for too much money for a guy who's going to be a role player, but he really has added some speed and some tenacity to this team that it was missing last year. I thought that kind of thing would make the difference this year. You see a guy like Teddy Bluger as well, grinding hard. But I don't want to make this a eulogy, because the season isn't over. It's like you're down 3-2 in a best of 7. If they were down 3-2 in a best of 7, you wouldn't say it was over. So just because it's a best of 5 and we just saw the team blow that 3-1 lead, let's not act like the season is over yet, although I will accept your applications for Penguins general manager or head coach if you have some ideas on how you might do things better. Tyler Madog Ty Madog also adds on the Canadian feed tonight, the Sportsnet feed, mentioned Pittsburgh as the quote-unquote most experienced team in the playoffs. Yes, they are in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to Stanley Cups, but again, most experienced can also be a euphemism for oldest, and maybe there is something to that fade late in games. Bayan Abdul-Haq says the Habs 5-on-5 game is better than the Pens. I wouldn't have said that in the first 2 games, but I think tonight it was pretty close to dead even. In fact, if I look at naturalstattrick.com, right at 50%, almost split right down the middle. The Corsi events, which are all shot attempts, Montreal had 48% of the shot attempts. The Penguins had 52%. This was at 5-on-5. Let's go to all strengths then. Actually, all strengths. Montreal had the advantage. I wouldn't have predicted that, but I guess they had some pretty good opportunities with the power play, even though they didn't get great scoring chances off the power play outside the one that hit the post in the third period. Unblocked shots are dead even down the middle in this game, 50-50. And scoring chances, though, that's where I would disagree with you, because I felt the Penguins did control the scoring areas again for the third straight game, and for the second time in 3 games, they were unable to convert that into a victory. So 60% high danger scoring chances for the Penguins to 40 for Montreal. That's a pretty good split, especially in a stat that's usually a fairly small sample. It was 15-10, in case you're wondering, at 5-on-5. All strengths, it was 18-11, so even better when you factor in the power play. So I think 5-on-5 tonight was Montreal's best game. I'll certainly say that, but I also don't want to go out on a limb and say that it's been the case over the whole series, because it really hasn't. Issue for me, though, goaltending tonight. The one bad goal, of course. I thought Murray was coming along too. Maybe the third goal wasn't great as well. Murray drifted off the post and actually was fooled by Paul Byron's initial wraparound attempt that he stopped, but couldn't hold on to that post. As I mentioned, Jack Johnson was flailing around, and John Marino, for one of the few times in this series, got beat down the wall to lead to that Byron goal that tied the game going into the second intermission. But you know what? The Penguins' blue line, I harped on it last game, and Chris Letang and Brian Dumoulin are doing a pretty good job. I think Dumo's pretty underwhelming. Letang is playing a pretty good two-way game, pretty quiet game, but it's working for him right now, especially if you look at some of the shot metrics out there. Letang had another strong game here for the Penguins. He was at, 60% shot attempts for Letang. So yeah, when you're a defenseman, you get a lot of shots for and against. 60 is really good for a given game. Crosby and Gensel and Sherry were up around 66%. So those are your stars, the top defense pairing and the top line, but the depth just not coming through right now. Malkin and his unit was right around 50-50 when it comes to controlling play. 2 goals against, though, when Malkin and his unit was out there. So defensively struggling were Rust and Zucker in those situations. And if you're going to play those guys together, none of those guys are really known for their defending. So they have to score. They have to get on the board, or at least create a little bit more. They have to spend more time in the offensive zone like the Crosby line has. So I wonder, maybe if you look at adjustments for game 4, perhaps Gensel with Malkin. Remember, those two were clicking before Gensel's injury this season. And then you bump up perhaps Jason Zucker to Crosby's line. That could be something that could help get Malkin going, because it feels like maybe an embarrassment of riches on that top line with Gensel and Crosby together. Malkin needs to produce, and I think Crosby might be better suited to produce with Zucker, so that could be an option for game number 4. And a reminder, we're going to be talking to Dan Kingerski as soon as he gets done with his post-game press conferences out there in Toronto. If he does get done in the next 10 minutes or so, we will welcome him aboard. Check out all of his coverage at PittsburghHockeyNow.com. By the way, you can join on as a premier member as well for a small fee per month, and get all of his PHN Plus stories and analyses too. Dan, one of the few media members in the area who made the trip up to Toronto, so glad to see him reaping the benefits, getting a chance to see these games in person. I would love to see these games in person, but unlike the rest of you, I'm just watching on TV. Back to my point about defense. Marcus Pettersson, unremarkable. Jack Johnson, complete tire fire. Justin Schultz, he's not contributing nearly enough at the offensive end. He was more than passable when he was creating chances, when he was being a presence in the offensive zone, but he's not even able to get the Penguins there. I feel like his passing is off, his skating is off. He's just not quite as great of an all-around athlete as he appeared to be a couple of years ago. Maybe it's confidence, maybe it's a couple of injuries. Remember, he's had some long-term ones, including that broken leg. That was earlier this year. Yeah, it feels like 10 years ago at this point. It's a difficult spot because they don't have a lot of depth on the blue line. I know Juuso Riikola has been intriguing for some members of the fan base. I know the coaching staff doesn't seem to trust Juuso to cover in his own end. Chad Ruido has the same problem. So the Penguins suddenly don't have a lot of options on the blue line when it comes to either lockdown defending or contributing at the offensive end. And I keep going back to that comparison. I watched Columbus and Toronto play game 1 earlier this week, and I was just blown away by how much the Columbus D activated, how good of skaters they were. They're a younger group as well, so that helps. But the Penguins aren't getting a lot of help from the blue line, and when that's not happening, when the third line isn't going at all, Marleau isn't clicking at all, Malkin isn't isn't really making himself be a presence at even strength. And I know I mentioned last game that Malkin wasn't quite as good as game one, I felt. I know he had 7 shots. Someone pointed that out to me, that he led the team in shots on goal. Again, that was more power play. That was more stuff generated with the 5-on-4, which is great. You have to create there. Those goals and those shots count the same too. But the lack of even strength, even just a shift in the offensive zone where they hang around for a little bit, it just hasn't happened with Malkin. He's been one and done with that group. So that's why I think we could see some pretty dramatic lineup changes. Personally, I would bench both Johnson and Schultz, throw Riikola out there on the left side, throw Ruido out there on the right side. You could even load up on the top 4 because it's a desperation elimination game coming up in game 4 on Friday. So that's where I would go with that. I would shuffle the lines. I think I would put Guentzel with Malkin. The more I talk about it, the more I talk myself into it. Again, this is Pittsburgh Postgame. Loving your contributions here. Jeff Candlemo says, good to see and hear you again, Matt. Thank you very much. I just gave you my lineup changes, which you were asking for. And Yankel also has a point of view on Malkin here. I feel like we're seeing the underwhelming Malkin from last season, as opposed to the beast we saw carrying the team through Crosby's injury this year. You could have a point there. I don't feel like Malkin's been anywhere near his level from the regular season. And that's what I was afraid of with this long layoff, too. You have some elite talents. You have some guys like an Evgeny Malkin, who at times hasn't been the most consistent from year to year or even within a given season. So a 4-month layoff, that was a concern for me, and it appears that concern has been founded. And no, Jeff Candlemo, Murray is not my goaltender. I would go with Tristan Jarry in game 4. I would have started in this series for game 1, and I would have thought about it for game 2 as well. I get why Mike Sullivan went back to him for game 2, Murray that is. But Jarry has been better more recently than Murray. That's all I'm worried about. What have you done for me lately? It sounds harsh. I'm not hating on Matt Murray, even though I've never been a huge fan of his overall game. I mentioned last game that his quick feet movement, that's what sets him apart. But I don't feel like he's anywhere near the stick handler as Tristan Jarry. I don't feel like his hands work as well as Tristan Jarry. And I don't feel like he's athletic as Tristan Jarry in general. I don't feel like he can steal a game as much as Tristan Jarry could. Not that we should expect the Penguins to need a goalie like that, but it would help, right? Maybe if they get outplayed in one of these final 2 games, if they are fortunate enough to extend it out to 5, then perhaps they can get a superlative goaltending performance. But so that's where I would go. I would go Jarry in goal. I would take both Johnson and Schultz out of the lineup and put in Riikola and Ruido. And I would also go back to Jared McCann. I wasn't a fan of Sam Lafferty's game. He was running around looking for hits early on. He got a couple of hits, and I know he has that energy. That's why he's in there. But at least for me, McCann can shoot the puck, and even if he's been a little bit off in this series, he gives you more of an offensive upside and perhaps even more of a defensive conscience than we saw from Lafferty, who was out there for a couple of goals against. So that's where I would go with that. Guentzel with Malkin, hey, why not? Try that, put Zucker back up with Sid, and go down swinging, right, for game number 4 at 4 o'clock. Derek Shane chimes in. He says, one-line team right now. It's hard to disagree with that. I would say, actually, the Bluger line's been pretty good. Sid and Jake, that's it. Yeah, those 2 guys have been great. So if you're talking pluses, it's been really fun to see those 2 work together again. And it's a scoring chance created every time down the ice. Their consistency has been remarkable in this series. But the rest of the way down the lineup, the Canadiens have pretty much matched the Penguins there. So a couple bounces here and there, and here we are. And 1 bad goal let in tonight, and here we are, 2-1 with the Canadiens ahead in the series. Yankel Rosenblum says, Evan Rodriguez looked great in the training camp coming off the COVID break. Yes, I keep forgetting about Evan Rodriguez, and I think he can add something to this lineup too. So if you want to take out somebody, take out Lafferty, take out Marleau. If you're still not set on McCann as Mike Sullivan and his staff, then or if McCann is actually hurt, we don't really know. He was just listed as not available to play, not fit to play. If McCann is hurt, then you can go to Rodriguez because he can play center in the wing. That's part of the reason why the Penguins picked him up at the trade deadline. So for me, you just use the bullets that you have in the chamber, for lack of a better term, and you go with that. Walt Flanagan says they're dumb, bullheaded assholes, all of them. That's been Walt's refrain for a few years now. Even they were winning Stanley Cups, there was still a lot of that coming from old Walt on Twitter, at least. And I don't know if bullheaded is the term tonight. I was actually just, like I mentioned at the top of the show, unimpressed by their pushback after Murray gave up the bad goal. It just felt like they quit. And I can't say that too much about Penguins teams in the past. I could say they pushed too hard and were foolish in their decision making. That's happened before. That was the entire Islanders series last season, you'll recall. It was a whole bunch of 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s against for that entire series, and they never really got it through their heads. That was more last year. This year, there's just been these strange lapses, and tonight, it just felt like they ran out of energy, and that was the most concerning. And I realize that can be a mental thing as much as a physical thing, but still equally concerning. Yeah, Walt, you say I have a brand, and hey, I can appreciate the consistency. Wolf Gaming says Kessel wasn't the problem. LOL. I'm still saying Penguins in 5, but Murray's got to sit now. That goal in the third, you need that save. Yes, you do need that save. I can't say how surprised and yet at the same time unsurprised I was when that goal occurred, because I could actually see where Murray dropped down and he didn't need to, because in that situation, if the goalie drops down, then he's thinking, okay, the pass is coming across, right? But there was no pass available. The Penguins left Jeff Petrie alone because they knew that he was at a terrible angle and they had everyone covered in the slot. So for me, I don't have an issue with going down a little bit as a goalie if you feel like a pass is coming, but there was no reason to believe that was going to show up. So I'm getting word from Dan in Toronto that he is available. He is apparently on the line, so we'll endeavor to bring him aboard here on our little Zoom call, Pittsburgh Postgame. Again, this is Matt Gajtka. Thanks to Mike Osti for producing back in the studio as well. Looking forward to getting Dan's input here in just a little bit. Well, I don't see him on the queue just yet, so perhaps some internet connectivity issues from north of the border. Penguins lose 4-3. Yes, I can't believe it either. If you'd have told me in the middle of that game that they were going to lose that game, I would have thought it would have taken a couple of injuries to some key players or something strange. I guess the Byron or the not the Byron goal, but the Petrie goal was pretty strange. The Byron goal was pivotal because that's when the Penguins conceded their stranglehold on this game 3. It was within their grasp easily, but suddenly it was very much not in their grasp. And there is Dan Kingerski. Now he is on board here on Pittsburgh Postgame. Dan, what did you hear from the postgame interviews? Because I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that game switched from 3-1 after the Bluger goal midway through. Really, it got away late in the second, but still plenty of time in the third, and there just wasn't a lot of push in the third either from the Penguins.
No, there really wasn't. I've looked at the stat sheet yet. It's kind of weird covering a hockey game without being handed all the information, having it at our fingertips, right? What Sidney Crosby said was, well, maybe we got too loose. You know, Mike Sullivan kind of hinted at it as well. We didn't do these things. We didn't press, or we didn't, have what we needed. Look, the bottom line, Matt, through all of that, kind of reading between the lines and cutting out the BS, is the Penguins didn't do it. I mean, they let off the gas. They didn't want it as badly as Montreal. Montreal kept playing, and they kept their feet moving, and they kept charging at Matt Murray, and they got a couple debatable goals. Would have liked to have seen Murray save at least one, if not two, goals 3 and 4. So you're left to have some huge questions about this Penguins team after a game like tonight.
Yeah, very discouraging. Just to see, I almost saw their shoulders sag after the Petrie goal went in, and the next 5 to 10 minutes were just not very good.
It was over when that happened. It really was over.
It really did feel like that, and that's not what we're used to seeing. At least that's not what we saw when the Penguins were winning Stanley Cups in the early years of the Sullivan tenure. So I would agree with you a little bit, or not agree with you directly. You were talking about Crosby saying that they got a little loose. I felt like they were starting to show some swagger, maybe a little too much swagger after they got a couple of power play goals. But I wouldn't necessarily pin the decisive goals on turnovers or anything like that. Maybe it was more just getting beat physically as opposed to making poor decisions. So, you look back at the 2 goals Montreal scored in the second period. That's just a mix-up at the net. Schultz can't get his man at the goal mouth, and it's a deflection for Drouin. And all of a sudden, it's a new game at that point. And
glad
then
you
John
phrased
Marino
it.
gets beat down the wall too. And like we talked about in the past, Jack Johnson couldn't help out. Matt Murray got off his post. So I don't know if it's more physical than mental. It's difficult to break that down right now.
I would heavily lean towards mental. The team I saw in training camp had feet, they had energy, they had some mojo. I mean, their game wasn't necessarily crisp, but there was a certain energy to it. Against Montreal, the forecheck of Montreal, the neutral zone play, is bottling up the Penguins. How many times tonight did you see that cross ice flip out to spring? That to me is curious, because sure, it gets you out of the zone. It gets you with a little bit of forward momentum, but it's also a 50-50 puck. You're hoping Brian Rust or Patrick Hornquist or the winger on the wall can go get that bouncing loose puck before Shea Weber or Jeff Petrie do. You're not getting those nice breakouts with speed to the red line or even on the wall, and having guys being able to race into the zone to go get the puck. So tonight especially, I thought that was missing. They did get 33 shots, but they were being outshot for most of the game. They had that late flurry, and Crosby was just dominant, late in the game, but couldn't beat Carey Price. It really is mental when your feet aren't moving.
We're talking personnel here on the chat. And by the way, Dan Kingerski joins us live from Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, where the Penguins and Habs will play again, 4:00 start on Friday, as the Pens try to stay alive in this best of 5. There you go. There's your evidence. Doesn't look quite as good with the empty seats. It looks better on TV. I know that.
Here, let me try to show you the. Can you see like the scoreboard?
The unseen part? Yeah.
Yeah. Here's all the stuff you don't see. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry.
That's totally okay. Give us the scene there. It's obviously very unique this year. This is something we've never seen before with the neutral site.
Hopefully never see again.
Yeah, exactly. You said it, my friend. Personnel or tactical, what do you think would be your biggest adjustment for Game 4?
Well, I just got off the phone with a source or two back in Pittsburgh, and believe me, there are some red faces, anger back in Pittsburgh. Yeah. So obviously Mike Sullivan makes those calls, but there might be some support for some sweeping personnel changes for Game 4. Like I said, I don't want to speak for Mike Sullivan, because obviously, he was not part of the conversations yet and hasn't weighed in yet. And that could just be a couple folks who were venting or quite angry at this point. It's Game 4. If you haven't solved it by now, I don't know that any more tactical adjustments can be made. They dominated Montreal in the first 2 games. They got it in, they kept it. What they weren't doing was holding the puck in the right spots, creating some space and getting a guy open. Connor Sherry just he kind of befuddles me a little bit, because he's kind of there in the right spot, but the puck's always like in his skates, or he's on the ice to one knee, or he always just comes to he's not the strong winger that his hockey IQ might otherwise lead him to be. So I think you're going to see a lot more Patrick Hornquist on the top line in Game 4. Saw some of that tonight. I think you're going to see a lot more of it in Game 4. I think the third line might be a lost cause at this point. Sam Lafferty, I thought he was strong, but the line sucked.
Yeah, there was nothing there. Evan Rodriguez, chance?
Chance, but do you take out Patrick Marleau?
I might. Yeah, he hasn't done much of anything. So
no. I mean, I always, when someone asks me a question like that, I always weigh it with the emotion of the moment. And I try to kind of put it through the Mike Sullivan filter. When he sits down tonight with, I don't know what he drinks, water, scotch and water. Yeah. Tonight might be a double. That's a big swing if you put Evan Rodriguez in. I think he'd come out like a house of fire, to steal Gorilla Monsoon's old phrase. Mm-hmm. But it's a big gamble too. And if you miss, then you're down a full line. in Game 4. And so I would, but I don't know that Mike Sullivan will.
How about Gensel with Malkin? Because Malkin seems like he needs some help at even strength. At power play, he's been pretty good, and he's been peppering the net, but even strength just hasn't been there for that line consistently either.
Yeah, Brian Rust has been flying up and down the ice. He's a very noticeable player, but can we pinpoint one great scoring chance that he's had in the last 2 games? I think he had a couple in Game 1 in tight. I can't say that he's had any in the last 2 games. And Zucker, again, is very noticeable, but, well.
Maybe he goes up with Sid. You could just swap Gensel and Zucker. That's
yeah.
a possibility.
Look, I know you like the stats, the Matt stat. So I'll drop one on you here. Crosby and Malkin, 5-on-5, played with Gensel almost an equal amount of time this season. Crosby and Gensel had 13 goals for, 12 goals against. Malkin and Gensel had 12 goals against, but 21 goals for. So that might be a change you look at too.
And then defensively, is there any chance that we see either Chad Ruido or Juuso Riikola, because they appear to be far down the depth chart? It just seems like that Sullivan's ride or die with Johnson and Schultz. At the very least, Dan, doesn't he have to break up that pairing?
Yeah, it's, as I was breaking down the goals tonight, I'll say this. Jack Johnson was definitely the guy left holding the bag. Yeah. Whether you want, obviously when the guy left holding the bag gets blamed. And so Johnson's going to get a huge share of that. And some of it is certainly warranted. But Schultz missing Drouin right at the post. Johnson's looking at 2 guys there. Like, what do I do? Mm-hmm. He jumps up to Byron. Drouin scores, or Drouin, rather. So I don't know. I do know that there might be some support back in Pittsburgh from organizational types to put in Juuso Riikola. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to report anything tonight because I think emotions are high. I think emotions are really high and raw right now. When you blow a 3-1 lead, and you're now facing elimination, there's a lot of upset folks.
Well, they went from maybe thinking they were going to run away with the series and move on to perhaps face Boston, which looks like the lowest of the round robin teams in the East, to, well, now they need 2 wins in a row, and back-to-back, by the way, 2 wins in a row, Friday and Saturday. Doesn't get much easier, but I suppose if you do force the Game 5, then Montreal has to come back on short rest too. So I don't know if that really does.
Well, I think it actually would be to the Penguins' advantage.
Yeah, if they could win, right.
If the Penguins want to, they could go to Tristan Jarry for back-to-backs. Montreal can't go to I think Charlie Lindgren is there.
I don't even know who their backup is. Yeah, right.
Doesn't matter. Right. I mean, yeah. No. So you might get a slightly more tired Carey Price, especially with back-to-back. I think it would be an afternoon game Saturday as well. So you're going to go at 4:00 Friday afternoon. And so if there is a Game 5, you might get a little wear and tear on Carey Price.
Yeah. Well, personally, I would go to Tristan Jarry for Game 4. I would have started him for the series, but I also conceded that it was pretty close to a toss-up if you factor in long-term track records and sample sizes. But at this point, I feel like you do need to give that team a jolt. And hey, you have an all-star goalie there as a possibility. So if you don't use him now, you might even risk losing Jarry as far as like buying into what Sullivan has to say to him in the future if he sticks around on the team. I mean, we're getting close to that point.
That's an interest. I had never considered that. We do know that Tristan wants to play and really wanted to play more this season at times. I will say this, Matt, bigger picture. What Sullivan does with the lineup for Friday will tell you a lot in what he really thought tonight and what he thinks of some of his guys. If he takes a big swing, if he goes with Tristan Jarry, if he goes with Evan Rodriguez, he is sending a huge message to the team, like, wake up. If he doesn't, then I guess the other message is ride or die with you guys. Let's go, which might not be popular, but it's certainly the more head coachy thing to do.
It's the more Sullivan thing to do. It seems like he has developed quite a bit of loyalty to quite a few players, and for good reason in certain situations. But Also, there are some players kind of new to the table, new to the party here, who haven't won Stanley Cups with Sullivan, and I guess that's where the balance comes in as a coach, the year-to-year turnover, and especially this year when you're coming off the break, and some guys are in form, some guys aren't. Did you hear anything about Jared McCann? Was that an injury or was that a healthy scratch, do you think?
That was a healthy scratch.
Okay.
Mike Sullivan confirmed that they didn't think the third line was having enough impact, and Jared McCann kind of took the blame for that. I think you and I have probably talked in the past as well. Jared McCann's default setting when he plays in the middle is defensive. He kind of retreats to that. And there was a lot of retreating in the first couple of games against Montreal for that line. I mean, he's so fast. He's got such a great shot. He's got to be frustrating to coach in a sense where you want to turn him loose and he doesn't want to go, get turned loose. So, he watched tonight. Obviously, it didn't make any difference. Let me try to check here and see exactly how bad it was. There were no shot attempts in the first period. I think they had a 30% Corsi worked up by the end of the second period. And the final Penguins lines, according to Natural Stat Trick, the Sam Lafferty line had 3 attempted shots the entire game, 11 against, and 1 goal against, and 1 scoring chance. They yielded 5. So, yeah, those are not very good numbers. I don't know if you go back to McCann or if you pop in Evan Rodriguez. I'm not sure it matters.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, you do look at the Corsi numbers, and there are just a few negatives for the Penguins, but the negatives were really negative. Patrick Marleau was 4 shots for, 15 against. Lafferty was 4 to 14. Hornqvist was 6 to 16. These are all even strength numbers, by the way. Bluger was actually slightly positive. So the fourth line, if you want to call it that, you could call it the third line now. They were in the positive. And then you had Jack Johnson at a -4 for shot attempts and Justin Schultz at a -3. So the rest of the team, Dumoulin and Letang cleaned up and controlling play once again. I think more of that's Letang than Dumoulin, who doesn't appear to be all the way in midseason form at this point. And then the Crosby line was just dominant. So I guess if there's a positive takeaway from that, Dan, that just continues on. I feel like every shift they've had in this series, they've spent the majority of it in the offensive zone, buzzing around the goal. So give Sid a lot of credit, give Jake Gentz a lot of credit. And despite his flaws, and you mentioned a couple of them at the top of your appearance here, Connor Sherry, give him some credit too for helping to facilitate some of that, because it's not all on Gensel and Crosby. It's mostly them, but it's not all on them.
Yeah, Crosby, to his credit or detriment, kind of relies on Sherry a little bit. I mean, he's looking to him. Those two have a real communication on the ice, and they're reading each other very well, and they're getting to the right spots. It's that Sherry isn't completing the play or allowing that play to take the next step. I know Penguins fans might want to sit down when I say this. In that sense, maybe they're missing Dominic Simone just a little bit.
Maybe.
For Simone's inability to score, glorious chances, he's not on the ice. He continues that play without getting knocked over, and he's a bit more of a successful, a rugger. Gets low in those corners and comes out with the puck more often than not. And I see Sherry get low in those corners, and then he's down to one knee or he's kind of pushed aside, and that's a big difference.
It is, and there's just that missing link right now. And even though the Penguins were again in control of this game for a solid 20 minutes at least, they looked like the favorite. They looked like the team that was supposed to win this series. It just didn't last, and that lack of staying power has them down 2-1. What are you working on for tonight or tomorrow, if you want to give the viewers a
Well, we're
taste?
doing the report card tonight. They're going to toss me out of the arena here in 15 minutes. They
Okay.
the 15-minute warning. That's what I was peering over. They send the security guard, those late night workroom sessions that you and I used to engage in.
Yeah.
Kind of battling Seth Rohrbaugh to see who could stay the latest. Those are not happening in the hub. I don't want to call it the bubble, but the hub here. They toss us out pretty quickly. We'll have the report card tonight. Matt, I'm going to have I think I'm going to do it. A scalding hot take for tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Maybe it's the right time. Maybe it's not. I held my fire a little bit after game one. I'm not going to keep my powder dry after tonight's loss. It was relatively inexcusable, especially for a team this good, to get loose, to take their foot off the gas, and to not be just morose, miserable, angry. Tells me an awful lot about the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Well, your powder might not stay dry. We'll see if Mike Sullivan's powder stays dry in terms of making some big changes. It's going to be a very interesting next, I was going to say 48 hours, but we're not even close to 48 hours. It's closer to 36 than it is to 48 before the next game, the face-off at 4. Remember, 4 o'clock on Friday. We'll have a Pittsburgh postgame once again. Maybe the last of the abbreviated 2020 COVID playoffs. Maybe not. Maybe it's just the beginning. I guess that's the beauty of it. We'll find out together. Go to Pittsburgh Hockey Now for all of Dan's coverage from the site. Again, Dan is on site in Toronto, and that is not exactly a common occurrence for a lot of hockey media to make the trip up to the hubs, whether it be in Toronto or Edmonton.
Well, I'm one of 5 who did it. Yeah.
There you go. So listen to what he has to say. He's watching these games live. I'm envious of him for that, but we're all checking it out on TV. What we all saw was the Penguins squandering a 3-1 lead to lose 4-3 and fall behind 2-1. Are those for some Matt stats in this best of 5 elimination series, qualification series, whatever you want to call it? The Penguins are in some big trouble. We'll talk to you on Friday for another Pittsburgh postgame. God bless and good night.